time with us, because as fertility experts, we know stimulations, we know picking up, we know putting back the embryos. But then what happens? Why are we not able to get as great when we put in an embryo? Why is there no pregnancy? So that is what has always been the difficult part for us to understand and explain our patients. And I'm sure we will come out more enlightened at the end of this. Over to you, Dr. Kuldeep.
Thank you, Dr. Padmaja, for kind words. Even I am your fan since then, because your smile and the friendliness is really treasure. You don't get many times in today's scenario. So thank you again for getting me the opportunity to connect with all the members, uh, even in this pandemic time. So thank you for that. I will be speaking on a subject which is actually very important for all infertility consultants. Not only infertility consultant, even the gynecologist. This is a very important subject when it comes to treating your infertile patients. Uh, Before I begin my talk, as Dr. Padmaja has already introduced candidature for Vice President Foxy. I take this opportunity to seek your vote and support for coming election Foxy. I am your candidate for Vice President from North Zone. I have been associated with Foxy for last 35 years and worked in various positions throughout. Uh, my last assignment was chairperson endometriosis committee Foxy, where I got the opportunity to interact with all Foxians all over India. And now I'm looking for a bigger role in Foxy. So I seek your support and blessings. Voting will start from 1st September to 10th September. It will be online. So please do vote for me. Thank you very much. Coming on to the topic of today, failing endometrium, is there a way out? Uh, Whenever we think of conception, it is always uh, selecting the right seed for the right soil. So if there is a problem in the seed or in the soil, you won't have a optimized outcome. Most of the research is actually focused in last 20 years on embryo. Uh, Various stimulation protocols have been devised to get the best quality of embryo. Then blastocyst culture. So culture conditions, they have improved a lot. A lot of advances in genetically selecting the best embryo. So you see, all research is actually focused on the embryo side, while the endometrial environment largely overlooked uh, in our clinical practice. And that this is very important slide. You see, uh, this gap, we have to fill this gap. This is implantation gap. We are starting 100 cycles, doing agreeable in almost all cases, transferring in more than 85% of the patient. But when it comes to the implantation and pregnancy, there is a huge gap, and we need to fill up this gap. And this comes from the implantation failure. If you search PubMed, again you will find a lot of papers. This slide is 6 year old, and it is still true. We are having 18,000 plus researches on embryo, but here you see very few on endometrium. So let us look what are the factors which might affect endometrial receptivity. Uh, when we talk of endometrial receptivity, so it is not only thickness, but thickness is one important parameters for endometrial receptivity. And as a clinician, as a gynecologist, as an infertility consultant, we are mainly looking at the thickness of uterine lining and devising our protocols. Second thing, there is endouterine pathology. So whenever we are having a simple pathology, even a small polyp, that may be preventing the implantation to occur. And these are very easy to treat and very easy to detect. We are having a lot of means to detect endouterine pathology. Only thing, you have to look at it, you have to get yourself convinced and treat it. So that is how you can increase the receptivity. And then third factor, which is actually a gray area, immunological implantation dysfunction. So as a clinician, I think what is required, you use these two tools and work on the immunological. So that is how the uterine receptivity can be increased. Now coming on to how to assess the endometrium, there are various ways to assess. Most common and most important is 2D ultrasound. Use it fully, you will be able to assess almost 99% of the patients up to great certainty. At least you will know that this patient requires further investigation. Then you can add on to 3D ultrasound, color Doppler. Histosalpingography is a very, very decent mean and very first line instrument, the investigation to assess the endometrial cavity. When you are assessing the tube, you also seeing the cavity
Yes,
and
sir.
all
Sir, can
filling.
you go to full slide screen
Yeah,
mode,
yeah,
sir?
yeah. Just.
Yes.
Yeah. Is that okay?
Yes, sir. Fine, sir. Fine, sir.
And then comes the hysteroscopy, which has been underused, but now we are having more and more exposure and more and more expertise. This is a very wonderful tool to assess the endometrium in all patients. And then, of course, the advances like ERA and electron microscopy. This is a 2D picture, and you can see the cyclical endometrial changes starting from the post-menstrual phase, going on to the peri-ovulatory phase, and this is the just before ovulation. You are seeing, if you are seeing this type of endometrium, you are very happy. Okay, so the thickness is good, the pattern is good, it is the multi-layered endometrium, and then it enters into. So this is the normal what you want to see, but it doesn't happen always, and you may start seeing problem here or maybe for that matter here. Then if you add color Doppler here, so again that is a very important tool to assess the endometrial receptivity. And if you are able to see these two type of picture in your patient, peri-ovulatory, then certainly this patient is a very good having very good prognosis as far as the endometrium is concerned. But again, this doesn't happen. Patient may have this type of picture at the peri-ovulatory phase, and then it is compromised. So let us look how big is the problem and how sensitive are these parameters which we are using. This is our statistics, and this reflects whole Indian scenario. If you take only endometrial thickness into consideration, then endometrial problem is not huge. It is only 3.1% of whole infertile couples who are having thickness problem. But is it not? It is not like that. Many patients are having endometrial defect, but having a good endometrium. So if you add pattern also here, this will increase to 12%. And if you add color flow also, it becomes 20%. And if you add hysteroscopy, all three may be normal, but hysteroscopy may show a lot of subtle defect. So it comes to 73%. So it is better to combine all the parameters to assess the endometrial receptivity rather than waiting only for thickness. And same is here, the outcome. If you take ET, again, it is a very sensitive parameter for endometrial receptivity. These are not very sensitive parameter. You may be having poor flow, but still 25% patient will conceive. If you may be having poor pattern, then 10% patient conceives. But if you are having a poor ET, only 5% patients they do conceive. So as far as the sensitivity is concerned, endometrial thickness is very important tool in your hand. So if you are having a thin endometrium, even when you are having a good flow, your patient is poor prognosis. Now coming on to uh, options available to improve the endometrial thickness, a whole list is there. You can treat infection if it is because of some acute infection, your patient is having a endometrial problem. or a chronic infection. Usually it is chronic infection like tuberculosis, which is causing the problem of endometrial receptivity. But you have to find out and treat. If it is tuberculosis, give 6 month treatment and then go on to the next step. If it is because of protocol, like you have used clomiphene citrate, it is known to cause thin endometrium, change the protocol. Very simple. You move on to gonadotropin, you will have a better endometrium. If you are having some intrauterine pathology, you have to go and correct it. And histoscopy comes into picture. And then there are a whole lot of drugs like estradiol valerate, low dose aspirin, sildenafil, GCSF, PRP. So I will be following all these in next 15-20 minutes. Coming on to hysteroscopy, how helpful it is and should it be done in all cases? Let us see. This is our data of 500 cases, and you see almost 55% of the patient had abnormal finding. This was a highly selected group of infertile couple, infertile patients only. So these patients, they do have a lot of abnormalities, especially in the form of grade 1 endometritis, and these are missed on ultrasound. And even 3D cannot pick up focal atrophy and other things. And these are the patients which are having poor endometrial receptivity. Then, of course, grade 3, grade 4 endometritis and septum, polyp, and myoma. And these are some of the pictures which are, this is corrected picture after adhesiolysis. You can see subtle adhesions here, and these adhesions cannot be picked up by 2D ultrasound or 3D ultrasound. And once you correct the cavity and use the estradiol valerate, usually there is regeneration after adhesiolysis, and you have a better endometrial receptivity. These are some of the common findings which on ultrasound, on hysteroscopy. You can see this area is atrophied. This area is also, so this patient is having focal atrophy, subtle adhesions here on the corneal side. So this patient will require the treatment diagnosis as well as the correction. Like here, so though the whole cavity is available, but this is the sign that patient is having had some infection, and many times it comes like tuberculosis positive. These type of adhesions, again, they are very easy to be identified as well as get corrected. So if you transfer any embryo in this type of cavity, you are not going to get pregnancy. So it is always better to correct these adhesions by hysteroscopy. Hysteroscopy actually has come as a very important tool to correct endometrial defect. Here you can see we are using usually the microscopic scissor, not current, because if you are using current on the endometrium, you may damage rather than getting a regeneration. So if you are using a current, you have to be very careful. Especially we use current only on the lateral side, because on lateral side microscopic scissor, hysteroscopic scissors, they don't usually can't use. So at the end of the procedure, if you see here, you are having a very nice cavity for implantation, and you can see a good endometrium covering lot of places. And these patients, if they are given estradiol valerate for 6 to 8 weeks post-operatively, you will have a better endometrium to transfer. Now, this is another patient which is having Esserman grade 4. Only this portion of the endometrial cavity was available. 20% cavity is available, and the rest of the cavity is not there. Now, these patients are very, very difficult to treat, but still you can go for histoscopic adhesiolysis in these patients to improve the chances of implantation. Of course, the prognosis is not very good, but other option only in this patient is the surrogacy. So before going on to the surrogacy, you can do extensive adhesiolysis and expand the cavity. And this is the see, you can see now the cavity is almost 80% opened up. Uh, this is on the lateral side, and you can see the cavity very nicely after adhesiolysis. So this type of surgery, of course, requires a lot of expertise, but is very fruitful in these patients. You can see even the ostia at the end of the procedure. So that is what can be done by histoscopic procedure. Then there are the septa, which can be easily corrected, and they again increase the endometrial receptivity. Once the septa are corrected, polyps are removed, you are going to get this is the polypectomy, which can be easily done again, and then submucous myoma. These type of pathology, they can be easily diagnosed and corrected, and you can improve the endometrial receptivity by histoscopy. So our data shows like 55% were abnormal findings and all were corrected. And after correction, you can have a pregnancy rate of around 35 to 40%, which includes your extensive adhesiolysis cases. So how effective is histoscopy? There is some evidence in literature, and you can see this is the update from 2010. Multiple papers, they have studied the role of histoscopy, and all favors histoscopy in, especially in failed attempts. So that you have to decide whether you are going to put a histoscope once you fail or before, because that is a debatable subject. But whenever you are having any problem on ultrasound, if it is a irregular endometrium, persistently thin endometrium, or you are seeing uh, fluid in the cavity when you are stimulating, or there is a space occupying lesion, you have to put a histoscope, correct the defect, and then proceed for embryo transfer. Now, coming on to various drugs available, sildenafil, whether it is helpful in improving the endometrial receptivity. As far as the thickness is concerned, it doesn't help in improving the thickness, but certainly it improves the what you call Doppler flow to the endometrium. And there are many papers which have supported the use of sildenafil uh, in poor endometrial receptivity. Another drug which is often used for improving the thickness as well as uh, receptivity is GCSF. When you look at the evidence, there is a contradictory evidence. Some of the papers, they suggest a potential benefit of GCSF installation, while many, they fail to demonstrate any effect. This is a paper of 2018, and they found that though endometrial vascularity in the intervention group was significantly higher, but clinical pregnancy rate were not very good. So it may improve the thickness and uh, blood flow, but as far as the pregnancy rates or ongoing pregnancy rates are concerned, they are questionable. Our experience with GCSF has been quite okay. There was a significant number of patients which showed improvement in endometrial parameters. If you see, out of 87, 64 had a very favorable outcome. There was no difference in endometrial thickness. However, morphology changed significantly. So it is not only thickness, the morphology also changed significantly. And in this group, 30% had more than one IVF failure, and they have conception. So we can't just discard that GCSF is not helpful. Of only thing, you have to uh, counsel the patient about the prognosis. Even if you are doing GCSF, it is not going to help you in all cases. A word about PRP. If you see, this is another intervention which has been suggested for poor endometrial thickness and receptivity. And it has been, there are papers, though very few patients included, but all suggested that it is effective. And even our unpublished data of 2019, which says that PRP is effective. And in our study, we actually compared GCSF and PRP, and we found that PRP was better than GCSF in these cases. And another observation on PRP was whenever we use PRP in normal cavity, histoscopy normal, but endometrial thickness is not coming up. If we use PRP or GCSF, it is not very helpful. But when you correct the defect, like adhesiolysis is done, you have done the septal resection, in those patients, the proliferation effect was better with PRP and GCSF. So that was our observation. Then there is the experimental intervention, which is gene therapy or stem cell therapy. So it remains in experimental stage. There are few papers which have reported that endometrial stem cell and gene therapy could be helpful in improving the patient's implantation, in especially in defective endometrium. This is another intervention which is actually used in IVF setup, but again it is having a lot of limitation. So it cannot be used in all cases. But if used in cases where there is no endometrial pathology and there is recurrent implantation failure, then you can increase the window of implantation in cases of recurrent implantation failure, and personalized embryo transfer can be done to help these patients. As I have suggested that ERA is having a lot of limitation, so it is recommended only with unexplained recurrent implantation failure. When you are having some cause, then ERA may not be helpful. You have to correct the cause and then go ahead. Again, if the endometrium is not growing more than 6.5 millimeter, it has been seen that ERA is not helpful in these cases. Another intervention which is suggested for these patients is the local injury. Uh, how it acts, actually, it is not fully understood, but it promotes local inflammatory response, induces endometrial destabilization, and that's why improves the endometrial maturation. So it has been seen promising initially, but recently there was a study which has concluded that it is not useful. So again, the contradictory reports around the endometrial scratch, they exist. This is an old paper of 2012, which is said that it is helpful. Inducing the injury may be helpful in 70% of the cases. But again, this report needs to be taken as with a pinch of salt, that because it is not corroborated by other studies. So this is another study, like they said, it doubled the implantation pregnancy rate. So these are anecdotal report on scratch. Uh, Recent report are not very favorable on the scratch, and we need more and more data for routine use of scratching. This is again a paper of 2009, which said that if you take biopsy or you do scratch, then you can improve the pregnancy rate. This is a paper which has actually summarized all intervention in 2016, and here you can see the most current treatment are based on anecdotal cases and not on solid data, although worldwide many doctors and patients use them. In conclusion, this review found that it is not easy to provide a pragmatic evidence-based approach when you are discussing or you are treating the thin endometrium. So what you need to do, you have to be having a balanced information and using them on your patient on individualized basis. So summing up the discussion, if you see, there are multiple interventions available and have been used, but they usually get only minor changes in the endometrial thickness and receptivity. And this is this is very good depiction here. You see, green dot is beneficial intervention, yellow dot is unclear effect, and red is no evidence. And here is the list what I have described, and you can see all are either red or yellow. Only hysteroscopy is having a green dot, and that means that hysteroscopy is proven to be beneficial intervention. Rest of them, either they are having unclear effect or there is no evidence of any benefit. So whenever we are using these intervention, we need to counsel to the patient because there is nothing else to do. That's why in some patients they are working, some patients they are not working. So you have to counsel the patient very cautiously whenever you are doing these intervention. So take home from my talk is good endometrium is as important as good egg or embryo. Multiple interventions are suggested, but most of them are not based on strong and large RCTs. Hysteroscopy is an endometrial pathology, and it should be used judiciously whenever you are having a endometrial problem. GCSF, PRP, and scratch are promising, but require further supportive evidence. Till then, we have to use them a little carefully, and gene therapy may hold future. So this is one thing which we should look for. Whenever this comes into picture, we will be able to increase the implantation from 40% to 80%. So thank you very much for your present hearing. Uh, Endometrium is one subject which I think a lot of research should go into it to get a better implantation in IVF. Once we get that, we will be having a very good outcome out of IVF. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kuldeep, for that comprehensive talk. The thing is that there are a lot of questions that are coming up. So if you go to the chat box and see the question, we can finish off with the case presentation.
Yeah, sure.
And
I will stop share.
Yes, thank you. And we know that when we read, all concepts seem to be very clear. But when it comes to putting it in practice, sometimes we are still in dilemma about what to do, how to do it. So I've had two young doctors with me who I said, present the cases, what you've seen, how you've tackled them, and how did the patients respond. So I have Dr. Vijayalakshmi D, who is MD DNB, and she did her fellowship in reproductive medicine, and she's a consultant at Vishnupriya Test Tube Baby Center in Kurnool. And over to you, Vijayalakshmi. Let's listen to what you did. You can show screen.
Good evening, ma'am. Thank you for the excellent presentation.
Yeah, we can see you. You can share your screen.
Yes, ma'am. I'm unable to see the file, ma'am. 1 second.
You move your mouse to the bottom.
Yes, ma'am. I'm sharing that.
You can see the green share screen.
Yes, ma'am. I have clicked that, but I'm not getting my computer screen.
You have opened your slides on your desktop?
Yes, ma'am. I have opened.
Okay. Is your computer having low battery?
It is full.
I think Dr. Kiran maybe able to help.
If you want, I will share the slides with me. I have them. Otherwise,
yeah, ma'am. Better.
Okay, fine.
Ma'am, are you able to see it?
Can you? Did you or did I? Can you see the slide?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
Vijayalakshmi, can you see the slide?
Yes, ma'am. 1 second.
I will move them for you.
Okay.
You can go ahead. You just tell me next. You show this and I will move to the next slide. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sharing your slides. You just do this. I will go to the next slide. Look on to the computer. Don't
Yes.
bother about your sharing. Go ahead. You can see the slides.
Yeah, 1 second.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Shall I start?
Yes, please do that.
My patient is a 30-year-old female. She's married life since 7 years. She's a resident of Kurnool and she's A&M by profession. She came with the complaints of anxious to conceive. She attained menarche at the age of 13 years. Her cycles are regular, but she had a complaint of scanty bleeding during menses since past 3 years. It's a non-consanguineous marriage and she has previous 2 abortions and 2 ectopics. Next slide. First one was a missed abortion at 7 weeks and DNC was done for the retained products. Second was a ruptured left tubal ectopic for which left-sided salpingectomy was done. And third abortion was at 9 weeks for which DNC was done. And fourth was a right ruptured tubal ectopic. Right-sided salpingectomy was done in 2017. Medical family history is nothing significant. She's a vegetarian. Personal history, there is no history of any drug allergy or any addiction. Coital frequency is 2 to 3 times per week and there is no history of dyspareunia. Coming to the male partner, he's 31-year-old farmer and there is no history of any drug allergy or any addiction. There is no significant medical or surgical history. On examination, her BMI was 20.17 and she's conscious oriented. Her vitals are stable. Systemic examination is within normal limits. On parabdomen examination, lap scars are present and it is soft and non-tender. Perspeculum, cervix, vagina are healthy and PV findings are normal. In investigations on ultrasound, uterus was normal. Her antral follicle count on right side was 8 to 10 and on left side was 6 to 8. Husband semen analysis 49 million per ml, 5% rapid progressive mortality with 1% normal forms. AMH was 2.23. Hysteroscopy was normal. TB gene expert negative and all other investigations were normal. So patient was counseled for IVF in view of bilateral salpingectomy. ANTAC protocol was being done. We obtained 12 oocytes, 9 mature oocytes, and 9 day 3 embryos were frozen. Endometrial thickness on the day of egg pickup was 6 millimeter. Next. A patient had taken a break of 1 month due to her personal reasons. Then she came in the next period. So we started with the straight HRT in which estradiol valrate was given 4 milligram for 4 days followed by 6 milligram. On day 9, the endometrial thickness was 6 millimeter. We gave GCSF 300 microgram. Intrauterine transfusion was given on 9th day and 11th day and estradiol valrate was increased up to 8 milligram. Arginine, aspirin and sildenafil was added. On day 14, the endometrial thickness was 6.3. With all adjuvants continued, the estradiol valrate was increased up to 12 milligram. On day 19, the endometrial thickness was 6.4 millimeter and it was hazy. So the cycle was cancelled. In second cycle, we did her LPDR HRT. That was Lupron was given on day 21 of previous menstrual cycle. From day 2, we had given estradiol valrate of 6 milligram for 9 days. On day 9, the HRT was, endometrial thickness was 5 mm. We gave GCSF on 9th day and 11th day. And we had given injection HCG also, 150 units subcutaneous daily. And we had added estradiol 2 applications daily along with adjuvants, arginine, aspirin, Evion and sildenafil. On day 18 HRT, ET was 5.3 millimeter. She had PV spotting, so we had cancelled the cycle and we had given 1 cycle of OC pills. In third cycle, we went for a stimulated cycle in which we had given tamoxifen 40 milligram for 7 days with estradiol valrate 4 milligram for 4 days and 6 milligram for 4 days. On day 9, the endometrial thickness was 6 millimeter. We had given PRP on 9th day and 11th day, estradiol 2 applications along with the adjuvants. Day 14 HRT, the endometrial thickness was 8 millimeter with vascularity was good. It was in zone 2 and zone 3. The pulsatility index was 2.7 and endometrial volume was 3.2 cc. So we had planned ET and 2 A-grade blastocysts were transferred and beta HCG was 3,345. She delivered DF. Female baby 3 months back. Both are healthy. Just to update the management of thin endometrium in assisted reproduction, the Canadian Fertility and Andrology Society has given recent evidence-based guidelines in which the thin endometrium, it has been defined as like less than 7 mm or 8 millimeter, the incidence being 38 to 66% in ovarian stimulation cycles, and in IVF it is between 1 to 2%. And the quality of evidence, it is being of low grade. The measurement of thin endometrium, it should be measured transvaginally in the sagittal plane at the thickest portion near the fundus. That is from the stratum basalis of the endometrial interface along the endometrial canal to the other end of the stratum basalis of the endometrial interface. The adjacent myometrial translucent halo, it should not be included. Next one, ma'am. The investigations, as Sir told, the hysteroscopy can be used, but here the evidence is being weak, what they have told. Next slide. The potential pathological causes for thin endometrium, it may include Asherman syndrome, history of previous uterine surgery, infection, or radiation. Although the incidence of thin endometrium in these scenarios, it is very unclear, but they show that these are associated risk factors. Next slide. In the thin endometrium in non-IVF cycles, the patients with, that means in non-IVF ovarian stimulation cycles, the patients may be counseled that the effect of this thin endometrium on the pregnancy rates is very much unclear. And in ovarian stimulation treatment cycles, there is insufficient evidence to recommend changing stimulation medications or a specific stimulation medication. And there is insufficient evidence to recommend the use of adjuvants to improve endometrial thickness or even the pregnancy rates. Thin endometrium in IVF cycles. In fresh transfer cycles, the endometrial thickness less than 8 mm may have a negative impact on pregnancy and live birth rates. The patients might be counseled regarding this. And in fresh IVF embryo transfer cycles, they should be offered elective cryopreservation of embryos and transfer in a subsequent cycle when we encounter thin endometrium. In frozen cycles, patients should be counseled that endometrial thickness less than 7 mm might have a negative impact on the pregnancy and live birth rates. And for patients with history of thin endometrium undergoing endometrial preparation for embryo transfer, there is insufficient evidence that any specific protocol will improve the endometrium. Adjuvants, regarding adjuvants, there is a very low grade evidence against the use of aspirin, even the luteal estradiol, and even there is insufficient evidence to recommend the use of sildenafil to improve pregnancy rates. Even in patients with thin endometrium, we suggest against the use of intrauterine infusion of GCSF. And even the other additional adjuvants like pentoxifylline, HCG, GnRH channel agonist, platelet-rich plasma, or stem cells. Against all this, there is a very low-grade quality of evidence. Already, sir has shown this slide in which only the hysteroscopy has got some beneficial intervention. So to conclude, there is very minimal evidence to support any specific protocols or adjuvants to significantly improve pregnancy outcomes in patients with thin endometrium. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Kuldeep, do you have any comments to make?
Yeah, I think this is the same what I tried to highlight.
Yeah.
We are having a lot of interventions to practice, but when it comes to the outcome effect on these interventions, there is not much data to suggest. But still, we continue to practice because we need to individualize the treatment, and when we are using intervention, we should know whether this is going to be effective or not in that particular patient.
After 5 minutes.
So what is the suggestion actually of using these interventions? If it is cost effective, if it is not harmful and it is not having any adverse effect, then we can use in our practice on individualized basis. That is number one. We need to generate more data on each and every intervention before it comes into the routine practice. Like we are having a very good promising effect on PRP, but whatever data is being generated, they are very smaller studies, and we need to have more and more studies on PRP and GCSF. Initial data suggests that it could be helpful in improving the endometrial receptivity, and that has been my experience. So I think we need to focus on certain interventions which are showing promising results, and we need to generate more and more data. While there are certain interventions which are already proven not to be effective, they should be discarded. As far as the histoscopic intervention is concerned, I am very strong believer, and over the period we have generated enough data to suggest that histoscopy does help in improving the endometrial receptivity, even in those cases where you don't find anything. Now, how it is acting, we don't know, but that you have to decide whether you have to do histoscopy before you fail or after you fail 1 or 2 cycles. So that is a debatable point, but certainly histoscopy comes into picture. Like subtle lesions, which were what I try to explain, they cannot be explained by any means. Even in your patient, this patient had two abortions and two tubal pregnancy. So probably there was something at the endometrial level. She had some infective pathology, and that's why she had two ectopics and two miscarriages. So, and that's why PRP worked in your case, because this patient was having some endometrial pathology. So it has been my observation also, when you are having an endometrial pathology, PRP will work. When there is no endometrial pathology, PRP and GCF is not going to work. So I think we need to generate more data on that, and then we need to use these intervention in your clinical practice.
Okay, sir. We'll go on to Dr. Chandana. Chandana, you can unmute your mic. You're there. Chandana.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Chandana has been the chapter officer secretary since the inception, and a very dynamic young doctor who's always been a great source of support. She was the treasurer of WOGS, and I'm sure she will go a long way in both these organizations.
Good evening, Kuldeep sir.
Good evening. Good evening.
Vijay Lakshmi, is your screen being shared? Just a moment.
No, ma'am. It is okay. I'll close it 1 second.
Yeah, close once again.
Yes, ma'am. I have closed it.
Okay. Now, Chandana, are you sharing your screen?
Yes, ma'am. It's showing like one participant can only share at a time.
I closed it. See, Vijay Lakshmi, your screen is still coming. You're viewing the Vijay Lakshmi screen. Can you close? Otherwise, log out and log in again.
Ma'am, is it stopped?
No.
No.
I'll log it out and I'll come back.
Log out and come back. Yeah. Chandana, we can see
Yes,
you.
ma'am.
Oh no, Chandana, try sharing your screen now.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Only one participant can share. That's what it's showing, ma'am.
Still it is showing only that?
Yeah. Yeah. Is that okay, ma'am, now?
Now see? Is it still showing the same? Okay. Mm,
I think it came on the screen and then now it is not showing again.
Yeah, just now it had come.
uh,
Mm,
shall I project, Chandana?
okay, ma'am. Yeah. I'm going near the share screen option.
No, no.
Is that okay, ma'am?
Yeah.
I'm projecting your screen. You
Okay, ma'am.
share your video. We can't see you. And you can start the presentation.
Is this okay, ma'am?
We still can't ask to start video. Yeah, we can see your video. Yeah, please go ahead, Chandana. When you tell me, I will move. Okay?
Yeah.
You can see the screen.
Good evening, Kuldeep sir, and good evening, Padmisha madam, and thanks to Shield who have made this webinar wonderful until now, and it's going to be really good for the next few minutes. The whole discussion, and thanks to all my friends who have taken time to join this webinar. Thin endometrium has certainly been a very bad endometrium to all of us. With your permission, ma'am, I think I'll stop my video and I would be comfortable without a video.
Okay.
Yeah. So thin endometrium has certainly been a very bad endometrium to all of us, because we just don't want to put our embryos. Ma'am, I have a problem. I'm not able to see the screen.
You can't see the screen.
Yeah.
You can see that?
Yeah. Thin endometrium has been a problem to all of us because we certainly don't want to keep our embryos very near to the basal layer of the endometrium, which has a very high oxidative stress. So today I will take you through one of our clinical experiences in tackling one such patient, Mrs. Y, aged 32 years, who has been married for 8 years, has been booked with us in March 2018 and has come with a complaint of inability to conceive and with a hope towards parenthood. On history taking, we have found that she was having very irregular cycles and she menstruated only once in 2 months, that too spontaneously. She never had to take any withdrawal medication for that. And she was a known case of hypothyroidism detected 2 years earlier, and she was on 25 micrograms of Tylenol. Her past medical, surgical, family, sexual history was nothing significant. Her past medical treatment history was that she underwent an IVF in 2014. It has not been mentioned in this slide, though. In 2014, the details of which were not available with the patient. She didn't know how she was stimulated, how many eggs were retrieved, and when the transfer was done, on what day and all. And her husband was a 36-year-old businessman without any significant medical problems. And she was an obese woman with a BMI of around 34.4, and her systemic examination was normal, with a normal per abdomen, per speculum, per vaginal, and breast examination. On investigating her, we found that she had classical polycystic ovaries with a high antral follicle count. Her husband parameters were normal. The only positive findings we could find in her investigations were her thyroid levels. Looking at her infertility problem was not under control, and she was having hyperprolactinemia. She had a normal HbA1c with an AMH level of 4.0, and her baseline LH, FSH, and E2 levels were normal. Having gone straight away for an IVF cycle in her previous treatment history, she was very keen on going ahead with an IUI. So we straight away counseled her and took her for a diagnostic hysterolaparoscopy. And in this, we found that she had an added problem to other than her PCOD. That was, she had a bilateral tubal block, and we attempted selective cannulation hysteroscopically, and we successfully could cannulate her left tube. Her hysteroscopy findings were normal. A TB PCR was sent for her, and her further advice on discharge was weight reduction, and we have counseled her for a controlled ovarian hyperstimulation with an IUI. Somehow the patient really took a long break. Probably she wanted a good weight reduction, and she came back to us after 1 year with a weight loss of around 10 kgs, and still her BMI was on the higher side with 30.5. Then with the patient was very desperate to go ahead with an IVF, probably the long duration of infertility. So at patient's request, we took her for an IVF cycle. Next, ma'am. This is her OCR report, and after 11 days of stimulation with recombinant FSH and HMG, we gave a trigger of HCG 10,000 IU, and we could retrieve 6 M2 sites, and 4 grade 1 embryos were frozen on day 3. And we couldn't do a transfer for her on the same cycle because her endometrial thickness was only 5 mm. Next. So here goes her second half of journey. So obviously she had taken a break for 1 month, and her first HRT was done in Jan 2020, wherein we downregulated her in 21st day of previous cycle with a Lupri depot injection, and on day 2 of her menstrual cycle, we started off with 6 mg of estradiol variate and folic acid and ecosprin. On day 5, since her endometrium was 5 mm, we increased the dose of estrogen to 12 mg, and we added sildenafil 25 mg per vaginally TID along with vitamin E 1000 mg. And on day 14, we found that she was still having an endometrium of only 6 mm with no triple line, and it continued to be the same on day 17th also. So we cancelled her cycle. So in Feb 2020, we took her for the second HRT. In this, we didn't do a downregulation. We followed a low startup dose of estrogen, wherein 4 mg was given from day 2 for 6 days, along with ecosprin, sildenafil, and Evion. And on day 9, she was topped up, since her endometrium was only 5.4, she was topped up with an estrogen of another 4 mg, and we gave an intrauterine HCG 5000 IU with an IUI catheter. On day 12, her endometrium was 6 mm. Then we increased the estrogen to 12 mg, and then day 16 we found still her endometrium was 6.3, and again we had to go ahead with cycle cancellation. So this is the third HRT cycle which we have done in March 2020, and this time we followed a stimulated cycle, wherein on day 2 we gave her letrozole 2.5 mg TID for 5 days with folic acid and all the adjuvants like ecosprin, Evion, and sildenafil. On day 8, when we did a follicular study for her, we found that she was having 3 good, nice, dominant follicles, 1 on the right side and 2 on the left side. Still, her endometrium was at around 4.3. So we added 8 mg of estradiol valeriate, and on day 9 we found that her endometrium was 6 mm. This is when we gave her a HCG shot, that is 5000 IU subcutaneously, along with a GCSF 300 micrograms subcutaneously. On day 11, we found that all her follicles were ruptured. And this was the best time actually to look at her endometrium. And to our surprise, we noticed that it was 7 mm. And this was when we gave a GCSF injection, the second dose. So this was the day when we started her off on progesterone, and on progesterone plus third day, that was day 14, her endometrium was 8 mm, and we have done an embryo transfer for her. And on 25th of March, she had a beta HCG positive, and now she's 15 weeks pregnant, ongoing pregnancy. So thin endometrium actually has to be tackled very methodically, because we have failed with a couple of HRT cycles. This leads to a lot of agony to all our patients. So every time we have to go back and check what we have gone wrong in our previous cycles and try to upgrade and give the best possible result to the patient. So next slide, ma'am. The routes of administration of estrogen and progesterone have been discussed vastly since long, and the best article which I have found was in Fertility Sterility, which has come in 2011, has shown that the best routes of administration of estrogen has been oral and transdermal. We actually don't use much of transdermal route, though the Western countries do a lot. And progesterone, it has been shown that intramuscular has the highest serum levels and highest endometrial tissue levels. Previous slide, please. Previous slide. So how do we go about actually with the endometrial preparation? What is the best startup dose of estrogen? Should we have to directly go ahead with the high dose estrogen or start up with the low dose estrogen? Or should we have to go ahead with the transdermal patch? Or nowadays we have estrogen gels which are available. A beautiful meta-analysis has been published in 2016, which has been published in Human Reproduction in August. It has reviewed actually 2,149 patients, wherein half of them were randomized to take an oral route and half of them were given a transdermal approach. Here, the oral route, they started with a low dose of estrogen, that is 2 mg from day 1 to day 7. Then they increased it to 4 mg from day 8 to day 12 and 6 mg till the embryo transfer. And when it comes to the transdermal approach, they have used 50 mg on day 1 until day 3 and topped up another 50 mg on day 3. And on day 7, they have increased it to 150 till the embryo transfer. Next. Next. So actually they have found that there's not much difference in the endometrial thickness, whatever the route you use. The best possible thing in your setup and the best thing the patient is compliant with, you can go ahead. A new ray of, previous slide. A new ray of hope to the thin endometrium has come from the Republic of China in 2013, when this case report has come showing a successful pregnancy in recurrent thin endometrium with new uses of an older drug actually. So they have studied the stimulated cycle FETs, wherein they have used either a letrozole or a tamoxifen when the patient was having a thin endometrium. And to their surprise, they have noticed that when you do a natural cycle or a HRT, the endometrium has not grown beyond 5.5. But when they used letrozole, it had grown to around 5.9. And when they measured the serum levels of estrogen and LH, they have found that they were pretty high than the HRT cycles. And tamoxifen, since it has a longer half-life than letrozole, they have found that even after discontinuing tamoxifen for whatever time you give, like is 5 days or 6 days or 10 days maximum which you can give, they have found that the endometrium kept on increasing. And more so, once the patient ovulated, beautifully the endometrium has increased to around 7.7. And actually the ovulation, the HCG trigger you give, all that which probably has helped my patient, and we had a beautiful 7 mm trilaminar endometrium. Next slide. GCSF is nothing new. It has been there in the human body, and it is actually produced from the granulosa cells. And way back in 1900s and 80s and all, it was found that a follicle having the highest amount of GCSF is the best follicle to do an ICSI. That's how it was seen. And it is actually produced from the endometrium also. And GCSF helps in implantation because it induces angiogenesis. It creates vascular remodeling, and it leads to desegulation and modulation of the cytotoxicity of the NK cells. Next slide. This case report by Gleicher et al. In 2011 drove more research on GCSF. Successful expansion of endometrium to greater than 7 mm in 4 of his patients, who actually had a persistently thin endometrium in spite of usage of estrogen and vasodilators. So he found that when he used this GCSF to his patients, all 4 have conceive, and the expansion of the endometrium actually occurred within 48 hours. Next slide. From there, the research on GCSF has been ongoing, and many studies have come up which actually told that GCSF is a mediator in the embryo endometrium crosstalk. And the best meta-analysis has been produced by Zhang et al. In 2018, wherein 1,600 patients who have undergone IVF and embryo transfer were studied, and they have found that clinical pregnancy rates were better in the group having GCSF. Next slide. And to arrive at a consensus on the usage of GCSF, this was a Cochrane review which has been published recently in Jan 2020 by Mohan S. Kamath et al. They have shown that, next slide, wherein they have studied a lot of randomized control trials. They couldn't take all the randomized control trials into the study because most of them were biased. They have seen that in the last two lines, you can see that 7 randomized control trials have shown that there's a clinical pregnancy rates were better when you use them in cases of 2 previous IVF failures, and 3 randomized control trials have shown that the clinical pregnancy rates were better when used in cases of thin endometrium. But they at last concluded that further studies are still awaited. Next slide. Often we make changes in our protocols. Our actions exactly might not be the same. That is, they might not be evidence-based, but still we could sometimes close a gap and give a success story to our IVF patients. Thanks to everyone for the patient hearing.
Nice case presentations, both of you, and they exactly told the journey from the clinician point of view of the analysis that Dr. Kuldeep had given us. What I wanted was, if we are using tamoxifen or letrozole and there is no follicular growth, will the endometrium still be better? That's just what I, because inherently, does the molecule even work at the endometrial level and not at the level of the ovary? So that was always my doubt.
No, I think what we are seeing the effect of intrinsic estrogen in these patients whenever we are using any stimulatory drug. Okay, whether it is letrozole or tamoxifen or for that matter gonadotropin. So whenever we are giving the extrogenic estrogen, and if your endometrium is not responding, so probably there is a problem of, one is bioavailability. Whatever we are giving, it may not be reaching to the target organ. Second thing, the receptor problem at the endometrial level. So these are 2 problems why the endometrium is not growing, and that can be corrected by intrinsic estrogen circulation in these patients when we are giving the ovulatory drugs. So it is directly related to the estrogen level at the target organ, which is working. So if you are not having a follicle, when you are giving letrozole, probably the endometrium will not grow up to that extent which it should have been when the follicle is there. So it is directly related to the intrinsic amount of estrogen which is working at the target level, and the number of receptors which are available to work on the estrogen. So these 2 things, they have to be balanced. Many times you are having a very high estrogen level, but endometrium is not growing. Either it is damaged, and that's why there are no receptors available for estrogen to work on, or there is an intrinsic problem with the receptor. There is no damage of the endometrium, but the receptors are not opening in that particular cycle or in that particular patient. So these 2 problems are there whenever we are having a thin endometrium.
And one of my suggestions is like most of these people where we are dealing with, they are dealing with long infertilities. So every one of us, when we are doing our ultrasound scan, when we document the endometrium well, we can go back to the records which show what used to be her endometrium in natural cycles.
Yes.
So previously, if we were having a nice 8-9 mm fluffy endometrium, then maybe iatrogenically we've been causing trouble.
Yeah. So that's why we have to come back whenever we are having a problem in induced cycle, or when we are giving HRT. Probably we are doing little harm in these patients in that particular cycle. So it is always better to stop that cycle, come back again, study the natural cycle. If you are getting and that is helpful only in ovulatory patients.
Patients, of course.
So that you have to remember. Otherwise, you will keep on wasting time. So if the patient is ovulatory, then certainly natural cycle might give you a clue that what intervention is required in that particular patient.
Yeah. And we had one question from Mega Shri Girish, like PRP, which kit to use?
No, PRP, actually there is no kit to be used. It is we are taking the sample from the patient on the day of PRP installation. You withdraw the sample and you have to prepare PRP in your lab. So the kit is no kit is being used. What we are doing, we are separating the platelets from the blood, and there is a protocol for that. By which you can concentrate the platelet-rich plasma, and that you can use for installation. So it has to be prepared in the lab. No kit is required. You can concentrate, actually separate the platelet-rich plasma, and that needs to be instilled at the same time.
Okay. Then how frequently do you use repeat PRP? Days of installation? Like do you have 6, 9?
Yeah, usually twice. One when we are planning, when we are just seeing that thin endometrium is persisting, or you have already planned PRP. So you do instill one PRP on the day of trigger, or if it is a just HRT cycle, then when it is completely primed with estrogen, then you give PRP, and after 48 hours. So usually,
and after PRP, embryo transfer?
If you are after PRP, after second dose of PRP, you again reassess the endometrium. If it is given you the required color flow and thickness, then you can plan your embryo transfer as you plan in any other cycle.
Okay. There was a question. Yeah, please go ahead.
When I was actually going through the literature on the usage of letrozole and tamoxifen, they actually told that in spite of not only increasing the estrogen levels inherently in the endometrium, they have some sort of immunomodulatory effect, because of which they have seen that they had a better endometrium thickness in the patients in whom letrozole or tamoxifen has been used for thin endometrium.
Okay. So we have a question, why was HCG used in HRT cycles?
That was a stimulated cycle which we have followed. We actually wanted to get closer to her natural cycle, or a minimal stimulated cycle, wherein since she was having dominant follicles, 3 dominant follicles, we wanted to go ahead giving a HCG 5000 IU, because some sort of immunomodulatory effect is there even for the HCG.
So even in HRT cycles, we believe that endometrium has larger number of receptors. It has receptors for every protein, every molecule, because pregnancy changes the body so much. So maybe those receptors get triggered and cause a better immunomodulation in the natural killer cell activity and the inflammatory cytokines in the endometrium. So that is the reason for giving. But we have to remember, whatever we are giving, we need to keep writing it down, so that at some point of time we can compare our data. Otherwise, what happens is we don't know which combination and permutation is working for which patient, and we will still be having only low evidence studies.
Yeah. I think documentation is very, very important, and let us actually we need to plan the protocols beforehand, so
Yeah.
you can segregate your work and then try to analyze, and if it is worthwhile publishing, then it should be. What we are doing, we have started keeping documentation, but we are not analyzing them and not publishing them.
Yeah.
So I think we need to get into, especially youngsters, they need to get into the habit of documentation, analyzing, and publishing, and that will give a lot of information for our clinical practice.
Probably in our first HRT cycle, when we used a higher dose of estrogen, probably because of very high doses of startup dose of estrogen, the endometrium even on day 14 has become compact, because actually why we start a higher dose of estrogen is for down regulation of the negative feedback of FSH. But that has been achieved, but the endometrium landed up becoming compact. So in the second and consecutive cycles, we went ahead with a low dose estrogen stimulation in the HRT. Probably that would have helped, because the receptors would not have gotten very badly down-regulated in the last cycle.
So I don't think anyone gave letrozole followed by tamoxifen. Now, letrozole was one cycle, tamoxifen was one cycle. Megashri, if you're looking into the chat box, Megashri has asked letrozole followed by tamoxifen.
Those were two different cases.
Two different cases, two different cycles. Huh? So I think that about sums up our this thing. And we've spent an hour and 20 minutes, and I think it was a very, very good interaction and a learning experience. Thank you everyone for being here.
Yeah,
Thank you, Dr. Kuldeep.
I think it was really wonderful connecting with all the members through this really interactive, and both cases present were really very good cases, and they actually had different aspect of thin endometrium, and I think it was really wonderful connecting with everyone. So thank you, Dr. Padmaja and Dr. Kiran, for getting us me connected with everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you again, and I again seek your vote and support in my coming election for Vice President Foxy.
Definitely, Dr. Kuldeep. All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Vijay Lakshmi. Thank you, Chandana. And thank you, Kiran.
Ma'am, thank you so much, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Kiran,
this
for
opportunity.
really wonderful.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir. I think your presentation was fantastic, with a great mix of clinical evidence as well as your personal experience, which is really vast, and I think the audience learned a lot. Thank you, Dr. Chandran, Vijay Lakshmi, also for wonderful cases. And a special thanks to Padmaja ma'am for moderating the session as usual. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you. Good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.